Well, it's what every kid dreads, but it has to happen. Summer's over, so it's time to go back to school. And we have Lieutenant Simmons here to just kind of give us an overview of what people need to know. We were talking about traffic. We got to watch out for that. So what are some things that people need to know now that school's starting back?
Sure. In Escambia County, our schools start this Thursday. So mom, dads, get up early in the morning, make sure you get Junior, the little girl up, and make sure you get yourself up and ready a little bit earlier, because traffic's going to be a little problematic. And we ask parents to pay closer attention. You got a bunch of kids out there. They're learning new bus routes. They're learning, just kindergartners first going to school. They're nervous and they're probably not thinking about traffic. So pay attention when you're in these school zones, especially at the school bus stops. These kids will jump out in front of you. They see the bus and they don't know to wait for the sign to come out for all traffic to stop. Just be careful. I think we had a young lady seriously injured last year out in Perdido Key area, and unfortunately that ended very tragically. So we want parents specifically to understand, to take their time, know the rules of the road. You do not pass school bus when it's loading and unloading. You don't pass in school zones. You don't text and drive. You don't talk on your cell phones. Okay, pay attention. With all the kids that are out there, you got to watch these parking lots too, especially at your restaurants and convenience stores close to schools. So please just pay attention and know that the kids are out there, and they're a little uptight. Okay, so just be careful. We also want the parents to instruct their kids on the good safety procedures at the bus stops and while they're going to school.
I was going to ask that. So like you were saying, it's kindergartners and sometimes it's their first time standing at a bus stop, or maybe you've been walking with your kid and standing with them and this year they're like, Mom, that's not cool. I've got to do it alone. So what are some things, some good tips for parents?
Well, first of all, we want the parents to know the times that their schools allow students on campus. And if your child is a walker or a bike rider and they leave for school an hour early, the schools may not let them on campus until like 10 minutes before the bell rings. So where are they going in the meantime? Okay. We also want parents to make sure that if they're a walker, understand safety. They don't accept rides from just any car that pulls up, okay? And no shortcuts. Don't cut through the woods or go down by the creek bed or things like that. You go the route that mom and dad know you're going to go to school. Yeah, and if you can, and if all possible, make sure you bring somebody with you. Travel, there's safety in numbers, okay? The same thing for bicycle riders. Make sure you have your helmets on. Make sure you stay where you're supposed to stay on the sidewalk. Cross appropriately in intersections. Wear bright colored clothes, reflective clothing. Again, as time changes and the earlier school starts to get in session, you're going to see it's maybe a little hazy, a little foggy. So just ask them to be careful. Well, your mom and dad, you tell them to be careful. And you get them the proper equipment. A big thing that we like to tell parents is not only the helmets, but you see kids nowadays, they don't have lockers, so they have backpacks. Think about it when you have a backpack on. Is it safe to have only one shoulder strap on your backpack and the rest of it's just dangling off with ropes and strings and straps? No, make sure they put both of them on. That way there's nothing hanging down to get caught up in spokes, get caught up in their feet while they're walking. Or God forbid, a car comes by and snags a part of it. Okay? Just little things like that we want the parents and we want the students to understand.
Absolutely. The thing that stuck out to me is that take the same path every day for obvious reasons. That way people might be able to see you. You're walking out in public and not in the woods where people aren't paying attention. And God forbid something happens and they don't make it to school that day or they don't make it back home that day, they can now give us that information. They take this route every day and it's a place for us to start.
We want parents, we want students and children to understand that make sure your parents, make sure somebody knows where you're going and who you're going with. Okay? We used to talk about stranger danger and strangers are bad, stay away from strangers, but we're finding out that some of the people that do harm to young children are not necessarily strangers to them. They have known them, they've seen them, they may know their name, there's somebody familiar to them in the neighborhood or maybe a relative of some sort. We want parents to explain that to the kids and know that nobody should do certain things with them. They should not leave without mom and dad knowing where they're going or who they're going with. And that goes back to the school. When you're walking or riding, going to school, however your transportation may be, again, do not take these shortcuts. Don't go behind the house, over the fence, through the woods, or wherever you're going to go. Make sure you stay where people can see you. That's close to the roadways, sidewalks, what have you. Of course, don't walk in the middle of the road. That's what sidewalks are for.
Absolutely.
And again, just travel in numbers. There's always safety and there's power in numbers.
Absolutely. And if a child or a parent has a concern about anything school related, that's why you are here as the school resource officer. You'll be seeing a lot of familiar faces and then some new faces this year. So talk about, what you're there for and what they can come up to you with concerns or anything like that.
I know as a lieutenant over the SRO program, it's been a very hot topic here recently, but I can tell the parents, and I reassure the parents that we have SROs in these schools. Every middle school and high school in the county, with the exception of I think Brown Barge and maybe Buell Academy of Science, and of course the elementary schools, there's going to be at least one SRO there. The SROs there are for the protection of the kids, and we're also there to interact with the kids on in a safer, more non-judgmental and in a less formal setting, because some of these kids only see law enforcement when mom and dad's getting pulled over, or there's been something bad happening in their lives. People don't call the police to say, hey, come over, have a glass of iced tea with us. It's generally because something bad has happened, and the children see that. So if we can interact with them in a school setting, a friendly setting, if you will, it helps us build those bridges and build relationships with children at a young age. They believe us and they trust us. And then it's incumbent upon us to hold true to that. So the SROs are there. They're there for a resource for the school, and they're also there for a resource for the parents if they have any problems or questions. One of the biggest problems that we have in these schools every single year is the cell phones. Moms, dads understand the statute when it comes to transmitting of pictures and different texts and things on these cell phones. The state attorney's office has taken a very hard stance on this stuff. And you don't want your child as a 12, 13-year-old transmitting child pornography over their cell phones.
Or the parents finding it and sending it to the other parent.
Yes, exactly. Then you got transmission of child pornography, and the statute is pretty clear. Once you transmit that picture from an adult to an adult, I mean, not only are you a sexual predator, a sexual offender, now you've got some legal jeopardy.
It might be something just as innocent as, hey, check out what I found on little Johnny's phone. We need to talk about this when you get home. And you don't even think that you're now distributing child porn.
And we tell parents, check your children's phones, check their computers. They're your child. They should not have a proprietary password. You should have that password. You should know how to get on their phones, on their computers. And don't forget now your video games, the Xboxes. You can get online and chat and do whatever you want to do. And a lot of the sexual predators that are out there use these phones. They use the internet services, the social media outlets. And once they get their hooks in them, it's very hard, and sometimes it ends tragically.
There's so many apps out there, and there's so many that you can even hide. The child can hide on their phone that it's hard to even see. It's so difficult. I think, I'm not a parent, but I wouldn't even know how to parent in this day and age. Like, that is...
Well, it's like this. You've got to educate yourself as a parent. The kids are inundated with technology. I was talking to a parent just the other day, and they said, well, when I was growing up, everything was done on a chalkboard. Now it's on an iPad or a cell phone or a Chromebook or whatever. So you need to educate yourself to what the kids are exposed to today so you understand it. There's a program coming out of South Florida. It's called Hidden in Plain Sight. It instructs parents where to look in their kids' room. I'm advocating that. Search your kid's room. They don't have an expectation of privacy in your house because they hide pornography, they hide drugs, they hide drug paraphernalia, they hide weapons. You think these things just show up, they pick them up on the way to school? A lot of them are left at their homes, hidden, where parents see it and don't recognize it as being paraphernalia. Okay? That's something we're going to try to get going in this county, that we can take it as a moving display to say, okay, here's a bedroom, mom and dad, tell me what you see. And they may see a can of hairspray, but they don't know the bottom of it comes off. Things like that. And they think it's just a toy or what have you. We want parents to educate themselves. We want them to understand what the threats are to their children. And I'm surprised every time I talk to a parent. I'll ask a parent of a 8, 9-year-old, do they have a Facebook page? No, they don't. Then I asked little Johnny and Jimmy sitting right next to him. Yeah, I do. Okay. And mom and dad were oblivious to that. And you know as well as I do, if they're on Facebook, who's their friends? Who are these people that are sending friend requests? Are they friends of theirs truly? Or are they adults? Or are they predators? Okay. educate yourself. Check your kids' phones, computers, do it as you have to do. I know we're getting a little away from the school stuff,
Yeah,
but
no,
you know,
that's still great
Very
advice.
important.
And you do that informed a parent workshop that
We
kind
do.
of explains all that. Do you have one that you're kind of
we're
putting
trying to
together
put
now?
one together just after school starts, maybe in September. Of course, that's a partnership with the Sheriff's Office, school district, the PTA, and I think the last one was in a city elementary school. I can't remember where it was. I think we're going to try to do this one maybe at Woodham Middle School. And it's just an informal meeting with us and parents, and just say, look, these are the things we like to talk about. Recent news articles out of national media was a bullying case where a young girl took her own life.
Yeah.
And of course, we use the bullying as a big part of our presentation, and just how bad the bullying can be, and how bad bullying can lead to what we call sextortion,
Yeah.
which is all things that we try to explain in our workshops.
Right. And we'll be sure to update everybody on our Facebook page and on ECSO News
Sure.
as soon as that is planned.
Well, we thank you for coming on and sharing all this. It's a lot of information. We know
It is.
the biggest thing is, remember, the school zones are going to be back on. Like I said, I don't have kids, so I sometimes forget, and it's a good reminder for those of us that aren't doing that day-to-day drop-off. Make sure your kids are wearing bright colored clothing at the bus
If they're
stops and
walking or riding, make sure that you can see them. Again, you'll see the flashing signs, school
Yes.
zone, you know, the school buses, you know, the big yellow beasts are out there again starting this Thursday.
Yes.
Please pay attention, please be careful.
And remember, you can always have an open dialogue with your local SR.
Give us a call, 436-9630, Sheriff's Office, ask for me, or I'll have somebody, or I'll return your call.
Well, thank you so much
Thank
for
you so much.
joining us. And of course, this information will also be on our website. And kids, welcome back to school.
I'm Escambia County Sheriff David Morgan, and thank you for watching Ask the Sheriff. This is your chance to ask me any questions you want answered about the ECSO. Our team hits the streets again, and here are some of the questions you asked. The Escambia County Sheriff's Office announced yesterday the termination of the clean sweep operations, which have been going on in Escambia County for about 8 years. Some of you may recall in 2009, one of the forward-leaning things that we did upon my assumption as Sheriff of Escambia County is we took some programs that had worked just terrifically in other locations. New York City had used this, Chicago had used it at one time. And it was a program to where we partner with other county agencies and go to the communities, and in conjunction with cleaning up a neighborhood, that's why they call them clean sweeps, we would pick up trash in many of the neighborhoods that couldn't afford to have extra pickups. But in addition to that, we set up traffic control points, we did warrant sweeps. It was a whole combination of things. No one likes this program better than your sheriff. But so again, for probably about at least the 20th time now, let me once again attempt to explain to the citizens who are asking these questions why these drawdowns at the Escambia County Sheriff's Office are occurring. As you well know, we're embroiled in a budget battle with the Board of County Commissioners. Make no secret of that. Anything that we're doing is a part of public record. I encourage all of you to look for those records. And so the assumption now is being made that when we cancel clean sweeps, we can now take that money and apply it to deputy raises, and so therefore we don't have a budget problem. Well, these observations and answers, if you will, are coming not only from our county commissioners, but now, unfortunately, citizens who have no clear and complete understanding of what the situation really is and what's occurring. So, again, for the umpteenth time, I will attempt to explain it again. This is not about eliminating manpower positions. It's about backfilling manpower positions that are leaving. A clean sweep operation is conducted by those personnel. We pay overtime for this. We actually marshal forces and send them for this operation on this particular day of the month, taking them from other law enforcement duties. For that entire day, they're scheduled to work a clean sweep operation. We're required, when we call officers in from off time, to pay overtime for those officers. And so we're pulling from neighborhoods throughout Escambia County officers that would normally be on other duties and officers that are off duty who would like to come in and make off-duty pay to work a clean sweep operation. So by suspending those operations, it does not save any manpower. It actually saves some money, meaning that we don't have to pay the overtime, But now these officers are not going to be confined to a clean sweep operation, but are going to maintain their duties. The situation is even made worse by this. We don't have the officers to fill all the positions that we currently have. Why? Because they've been leaving over the last several years due to the low pay. So I have manpower positions that I cannot fill because of the pay status. I have said many, many times, if by some magic today the Board of County Commissioners approved our budget as submitted, it would be a year to a year and a half before we would be able to recruit, train, and field those officers. The manpower situation at the Escambia County Sheriff's Office is that critical. So for those of you who are lamenting clean sweeps, thinking that this is a ploy or it's something that we're doing to get back at someone, it is a clear-eyed, logical management decision that we are making to address the situation on the ground as it is. Just like our decision with the School Resource Officer Program, we've met with the Superintendent of Schools and we've drawn down the SROs with the caveat and understanding that if the manpower situation does not better itself, we may have to cancel the SRO program. One of the things that we discussed with the superintendent was that potential or eventuality which may occur. He has the authority by statute to form his own police force, if you will, and we would certainly work with him in doing that. But again, ladies and gentlemen, is it something that we want to do? The answer is no. But we cannot continue with our existing budget at the Escambia County Sheriff's Office. That is a thing that we cannot seem to make clear to the Board of County Commissioners. Anthony asked the questions about the legality of fireworks in Florida, and how does it apply to the noise ordinances? Well, Andy, we really don't have a county-wide ordinance on noise, number one. They've tried it several times, and then you get the beach activities involved, and the county commission takes an approach that they want a county-wide ordinance. One of our local dance clubs, violated the quote-unquote noise ordinance for a while, and we attempted to enforce that. County commission got engaged, and that became a big ordinance fight, et cetera, with an understanding, Anthony, that we don't write ordinances or statutes, laws, as they're commonly referred to. We merely enforce them. Occasionally we're asked our opinion, but very rarely, by the way, on their enforceability and that sort of thing. And I will tell you the ordinance that is written is almost unenforceable by the Escambia County Sheriff's Office, and here's why. The requirement, because again, this is politics, so county commissioners get involved with constituents, and they're trying to get an ordinance skewed so it's doesn't quote unquote hurt one of their constituents or a local business. And what they create here is an unworkable ordinance, much like our panhandling ordinance. You don't see us aggressively going after panhandling. Why? Because we have so many of those thrown out because of the attacks by the ACLU and the Criminal Defense Bar that it's a waste of officers' time to do that. The noise ordinance is much the same. As I recall, the last time that was really an issue was out in Perdido Key at one of the local clubs. The ordinance was first the officer shows up, gives a warning. If it's beyond noise level, we're having to take decibel meter readings, by the way. If it's beyond a certain amount of feet from the building, first you issue a verbal warning. So you go in and get a hold of the manager or the owner and say, hey, you've got to turn this down. You're in violation of county ordinance, whatever the decibel reading is such. The officer, that's all they can do, first contact. So they leave, and then they have to wait at least 30 minutes. If there's any further complaints, they come back and take a second reading. And if the reading's above this, they get another warning, and this warning is you will be cited. And then finally, on the third contact, if you can believe this, a ticket will be issued, of which the max, I think, was $500 is the most it could be. And we had many clubs say, just give us the citation, we'll pay the citation. So again, that's an unworkable law from a couple perspectives. Number one, it doesn't solve the problem that you're wanting to solve, and that's noise. And number two, it ties a law enforcement officer up on such a very, very low-level misdemeanor, a local ordinance, if you will. Actually, it's an ordinance violation in violating the peace. So, we don't, as you well know, we don't have enough officers to, basically, go with that. And what you're asking me also to do, Anthony, and not just me, it's all law enforcement agencies, you're wanting me to modify social behavior. I'm old enough to remember there was a time that a phone call was all you needed to do, and if your neighbor was having a loud party or a group of people over and the kids maybe were out playing and getting too loud, You just called and said, hey, Bill, I got to get up in the morning at 5 o'clock. I've got to go to work. Could you guys hold it down a little bit over there? And neighbors would do that very thing. Why? Because we had a certain level of kindness and socialization with each other, that we understood we were our community. We all live together, and there's certain things that we must do to maintain an orderly society. Today we turn to law enforcement. We want to force, if you will, by enforcing, certain rules, regulations, laws, statutes, let's call them whatever you will, that will make you modify your behavior and comply with what used to be referred to as a decent society. On fireworks, that's controlled, Anthony, primarily by the state fire marshal. We have state laws that apply to fireworks when they can and can't be used in the city limits, outside the city limits. But we run into many of the same problems. Of course, they're a little more lenient and lax in the county. But the issue is again, we have somebody violating an ordinance, across the county or across town. Do we really want law enforcement officers tied up responding to, again, higher level of crimes, going basically with a noise ordinance? So, it has to do with priorities. While I know that's probably not the answer that you want, it is the correct answer. Derek's asking about, setting up an outdoor range, if you will. He wants to move to the county so he can, use his personally owned firearm and do target practice. We don't answer legal questions. Derek, along those lines, I would recommend you call the state attorney's office, and here's why. Number one, if I give you advice on camera and you go do it and then you violate the law, then quite obviously this videotape and the answer that I give you now becomes a matter of court record. Why? Because, well, the sheriff said I could do X, Y, and Z, and so I did it, and now I've been arrested for that. So would recommend that you call the state attorney's office. They'll pull up the most recent court rulings, the current Florida statute as it's been modified or gone back through the process of the legislative issues, and get the latest reading and get a go-ahead, if you will, from them. That's why we have a state attorney's office. Kim asked the question, and obviously there's a high level of frustration, and Kim, we share in that frustration. She's referring to a shooting out on Ross and Lane, where the folks that were eventually taken into custody had multiple prior arrests, and what are they doing back out on the street in decent society? Well, Kim, an excellent question. We share your concern on the law enforcement side. And as I said in one of the previous questions, you need to delineate responsibilities in the criminal justice system to understand where the breakdown is. I will tell you that with that many number of prior arrests and then the arrest for the most recent shooting, law enforcement is not your problem. We are in fact identifying these folks. We are in fact building cases against them. We are in fact arresting them and having them at least momentarily incarcerated, and they are being put before the bar of justice, meaning the state attorney's office, at which time they'll get a public defender assigned if they can't afford one, or someone will be assigned to them pro bono, and then the judicial process takes over. Now, your answer to your question is, there's multiple things that need to be done to correct this issue. Number one, we need to talk to our legislators and ask, why is it that we have current laws that are not being enforced by the judicial system, number one. And number two, then, how do we make those laws as such that they become more enforceable or more easily enforceable? I will tell you that over the last couple of years, we've started posting those very things that you talked about. You probably quite obviously got it from our press conference, where we post the number of prior contacts with law enforcement that these individuals have had, and again, our frustration in continuing to arrest them. So I would recommend that you work with the legislature, meaning our Senate and our House, not just one, that you work with the state attorney's office, and as much as you can with the judicial system. The issue with releasing criminals, I don't have the authority to do that. So let me be clear about that. When we go through that process and effect an arrest and have them, again, incarcerated until such time that they go before a judge and a judge authorizes a bond and they bond out, our part is over. Now, if they're re-released and re-offended, then we again get involved in that. So again, Kim, you need to work with those individuals that I just outlined to you. And I can assure you that if we have knowledge of these individuals in our community, whether they have a criminal history or not, and they meet the standards to effect an arrest, meaning our probable cause standard, then they will in fact be identified, arrested, and momentarily incarcerated anyway. Rocky asked the question about an incident that he had in his neighborhood where he had a dog get loose and he was unaware that the dog was loose. Unfortunately, his dog bit a neighbor, and the resultant calls for service, meaning probably first to the sheriff's office and not animal control, because this, Rocky, number one, is an animal control issue. We will engage, and most likely we engaged in this instance because the dog had proved that it was vicious, meaning it bit your neighbor. Under what circumstances, we don't know, and I'm just obviously going off of what your question is. So that was a reason for law enforcement involvement. You know, the dog may need to be euthanized on the spot, while animal control, you know, has tranquilizers and tasers, etc. In the event of a vicious animal, the animal may need to be put down. You say, well, you know, why did it take 3 deputies and 2 animal control officers? I don't know, Rocky. I wasn't on scene. I don't know if the dog was, you know, running throughout the neighborhood or how large your neighborhood is. We may have needed that number of people to cover the neighborhood and to get to each neighbor and say, stay indoors until we, you know, find and capture and or euthanize this animal. You know, you're asking some questions again while not being on scene, but I can tell you that number for a dog that now has shown that it will bite, meaning it would be declared probably as a vicious animal, if you will, under those circumstances, again, that you've described. I don't have any other information about this case. That's not an unreasonable number of officers out there to, number one, ensure the safety of that community, and to also ensure the safety of the officers that are responding to this animal call. Now, you ask about, you know, is that, you know, use of SROs. Rocky, SROs is an acronym for School Resource Officer. Those are officers who go through a special additional training class. It's 40 hours, and they're taught to work inside our school system. Now, you are correct, though, that during, you know, the summer months, our SROs are assigned normal deputy duties because they are all certified law enforcement officers. They just happen to be on a special duty assignment, some for several years, but some for short periods of time, working in our Escambia County school system. So I would think by your question you may have just gotten an acronym wrong, but that's what school resource officers do. Remember, you can also email your questions and ask the sheriff at escambiaso.com. We'll be back next week right here on Blab TV Tuesday night at 8 p.m.